freuen wir uns. Wir haben schon hier k15t, das heißt Thema Confluence. Freuen wir uns natürlich darauf zu lernen, wie wir unseren Content im Confluence auch nachhaltig erhalten. Und
ich hoffe, ich kann euch was Neues erzählen.
Bitteschön.
Genau. Okay. Genau. Also mein Talk wird trotzdem auf Englisch sein. Ich hoffe, das passt, aber ihr könnt gerne danach entweder bei mir am Booth oder direkt Fragen auch auf Deutsch stellen. Also geht beides. Genau. All right. Yes, so can you still remember that first time when you created your first Confluence instance or first Confluence space with your team? And for me, that was just last year when I took on the role as a product manager for our newest app in k15t with the name Orderly Databases for Confluence. And when we started to create that space, I think all my team members had like their heads full of ideas and wishes of new processes that those blank pages could be filled. But soon, I think we came across this first hurdle when setting up a new Confluence space, which is what we called the chicken and egg problem. And that means that we first of all needed contributors to create content, but then we also needed content to attract more contributors. And over time, the more we worked on it, the more pages were created. Some were ending up again in oblivion, like for example, the idea of documenting every product decision we made on the way, but then others stayed there for longer and were also improved more and more. And that ended us with our neat little Confluence space. At least that's what we thought, because then we realized, or we came across an entirely new beast of a problem. Because the more contributors we had, the more content was also created, and the harder it was to keep that content valuable and also in sync with the contributors. And especially new contributors couldn't even figure out anymore what part of that hideous mess was interesting for them, what was valid to read, what was just there because no one has ever deleted it again. And that is why today I want to show you 3 simple steps we learned at k15t to keep your Confluence content valuable over time. And some of those steps might be new to you. I think others might also be known to you. So let's see, or give me feedback afterwards, what was interesting for you. All right, so let's start with the first step, and that begins even before creating content in the first place, and we call this turning your mental model into a sensible structure. And because when I started setting up the space as a product manager, I had a pretty clear idea how I wanted to structure the pages, right? So I wanted to have like a specific product section where I had my product features described until they were released into our app. Then I had a Marcoms page where I wanted to manage all those different events I wanted to talk on and also my team members wanted to talk on, and so on. And after a while I realized every other team member of myself also had their own kind of mental model in their heads. So they weren't really following the stuff I have set up for them, but rather they were creating their own systems and processes which they thought would be the best for our team. So I think the first thing we had to overcome was this point that we had to combine all those mental models and try to find this one mental model, or at least discuss what our model should look like for our space. And then when it comes to structuring that space, one thing before that, I think that's what I at least learned is don't assume everybody will understand intuitively where everything should be, because everybody has a bit of a different perspective on things. There are people coming from dev that think completely different than I do. Then there are people coming from marketing who also have completely new ideas and other perspectives. So it's really important to not skip that step in the beginning. And then when it comes to creating a sensible structure, we found kind of 3 neat little tips we want to share with you. And the first one, let's start with the obvious, is that you should value your space structure. So we at k15t try to have for each of our teams a specific space we work in, and then we even have that for certain bigger projects or customers where we set up a new space, and that really helps to keep also the contributors at bay, that they know in which space they have to store which kind of information. And then on top of that, it can really help to trying to simplify your top level page structure as much as possible. And I think it always helps to think about, there are so many other people in your company that might come into your space, and that first page structure should be understandable for everyone, and they should really know where to click when they want certain informations. And for example, in our case, this looks like this, that we have our product on the top, which shows our product processes, and on the bottom, we have a parent page for each specific team role, and that also helps my team members to have kind of their own kind of mental model, which they can then store in those specific team roles. But the main product processes will always be the same, from idea going into feature concepts, and then underneath to the release, and then finally the user documentation. And then the last part when it comes to creating a sensible structure is to make use of structured content. And I think it's important to realize that you can't solve everything with a page tree and a space level structure, because at some point you will end up duplicating content in multiple spaces, and that never really helps. And so what we're trying to do, we use page labels and then also page properties to try to avoid this problem of duplicating content everywhere. And one nice example in our case is our weekly updates page. So we have one blog post that is shared every week, and it kind of shares all the information from all teams, what they have done kind of new. And how we do that is each team creates that in their own team space, and then by using the content by label macro, we then have one blog post that is then shared on our main company space. And this way, all those really nice informations from all teams can be collected asynchronously without having to communicate where to put the stuff and how in the end it should be ended up with. So that's how I had to blur out some things, but you will soon see the already part. So that's how our weekly update looks like every week. All right. So now that we got our first steps done, we have aligned our mental model, it comes to creating actual content. And there, the second step is to enable contributors to create content. And we see that the main point here, or we want to focus on that, is to simplify that creation process as much as possible, so that everyone who wants to share something with my team at least, they also have the opportunity to do so without kind of stepping outside the structure we are giving them. And I like to compare it with like the 2-5-1 chord progression in jazz. And it really helps to align all musicians to one specific musical bass line, and they can then become creative on top of it. And same with this chord progression, I think there are methods in Confluence to do the same. So here are two nice macros and methods we use. And the first one is, again, really basic, which is using templates and blueprints when creating new pages. So they can really help to give contributors a certain set of guideline, and also to maybe provide some placeholder in this text. And on top of that, we also recommend to use our completely free Create from Template Pro app. And this one enables you to set up a way better Create from Template button, and set up a bit of a better form or flow when contributors create pages. So this is how it looks for us. So this is our idea page where we collect ideas for our product. And now when a user has a new idea, he can click the Add Idea button. He types in the name of his idea. And there are other options what you can do. You can also style that button a bit. And then once he clicks Create, that page is immediately created. And now he simply edits the page. And there you have a nice page template to structure that part. And so he writes his pitch down here and in the end publishes the new idea. All right. Yes. And then the second part, which is also really important, that comes back to structured content, is to invest in page properties, to be able to store page metadata in a structured way on top of your pages that have mostly unstructured content. And this is a bit of an abstract way to show it, but yeah, you can store page properties on each page using tables, and then all of those page property macros can then be reported on your parent page. And why I'm showing you this in a more abstract way is because we see a few flaws with that flow, and that is that the page properties macro itself has some limitations to it. For example, it's not that easy for you contributors to follow a specific format when setting that up. And for that reason, now also the talk might make more sense, is we created orderly databases for it, which enables you to go beyond what's possible with the page properties macro. It's also a cloud-only app. And with orderly databases, we replace those page properties with simple databases. And those databases are set up on a space level and can then be referenced on your pages. And for example, in our feature concept page, this looks like this, that we have set up a new database. Is it starting? Yeah, now it works. Yeah, and each of those fields have specific functions and can be set up differently with specific input field types. For example, like a select field type. And now when we click into one of those feature concepts, we have only a part of the database showing on top of that page that can also store then the structured content from that certain feature. And now when you change the status in here and save the database, the changes will also be visible on your main database as well. All right. Yeah. And with that, now that we have we enabled our contributors to share one specific mindset, so one mental model, and then with that mental model, they can create pages that share a similar structure. We are basically done, right? Well, there's one more thing that will happen over time, right? So first of all, you get more contributors that join your team. That will make it harder for them to understand how everything works. But then you might have also new pages with entirely new structures coming in. And then on top of that, with things evolving, your mental model will probably evolve as well. So those first two steps won't be enough to keep your content in Confluence valuable. So because of that, we need that third step, which we call tracking and refining the content and structure. And there are also three methods we use there. The first one is that what helps us a lot is to learn from analytics. So Confluence offers a great basic tool set to find out which pages are used often, what pages are maybe never viewed or only rarely viewed. And then also using the search functionality, you can even find out what search terms are searched for a lot. So for example, in our case, I regularly check the space analytics of our space and look for mostly the high-level pages in there to check if there might be high-level pages that no one is really visiting or viewing. And I think that would result to me having to change that high-level structure again, because it doesn't make sense to have a page on the high level that no one actually wants to read. And then the second point is that it also helps to enable your team to track updated and new pages. And there's a set of simple macros you can use there, especially when combining that with page labels. And what we really like to do is to add the recently updated macro on our space overview page. And that helps us to always have in mind what pages have been changed so that everybody can have a quick look at them and see what has actually changed and maybe add some comments if they want to have it differently. Yes, and then the last point which is probably the most important part, but also the hardest part to achieve, is that probably there is no silver bullet or easy way to enable valuable content in Confluence or keep content valuable in Confluence. So it always requires manual work. And because of that, I think it's important that it's not only one person that should be doing that, but rather you should try to designate specific members in your team or talk to your team that this responsibility is shared throughout. And we call this job Confluence Gardeners, so that we have specific days where we say, okay, it's your turn to look through the content and maybe remove some content or change some content that it's readable again. Yeah, and with that, I think the only last thing to say is the reward we're getting out of it, which is, first of all, a knowledge base that is quick and easy to search through. And the second part is information that is readily available to everyone in your team. And what's not on there is that also it becomes more fun to create together and to be creative and to collaborate. And with that, thank you very much.